Now the next thing is, most of you probably don't have all the chords memorized in every key. So I'm going to show you a little trick to quickly get all the chords written out for your key so you don't have to think about it ever again. So we're in the key of D. First I'll write out my Roman numerals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you need to, you might make a little note to yourself of the functions of these chords if you need a reminder, like this one's a dominant, this one's a predominant, this one's a predominant, this one's maybe a dominant, otherwise I don't want to use it, and this is a tonic, and I'll put F for filler or maybe a tonic substitute. Okay, so that'll help me remember the functions. Okay, now I'm going to write out my scale. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp. What's in my first triad? D, F sharp, A. Guess what? Now it's easy. All I have to do is go up the scale starting on F sharp. F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D, E. And I'll start on A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G. The sharps there are the ones that fit into the D major scale. And now I actually have my triads for all the different scale degrees written out for me. Isn't that nice and handy? So you won't have to worry about it while you're going along. You won't have to think, oh, what's the 5 chord? No, it's written out. So I'm probably going to start on a 1 chord. I don't have to have a chord to go with every single note of my melody. I might choose 1 chord per measure, or I might choose 2 chords for some measures. Normally, as I mentioned before, the rhythm, and that includes the harmonic rhythm, or how often the chords change, it gets a little faster toward the end of the phrase. But like for this measure, I might just want 1 chord. And since it's the beginning, and since I do have a D and an A in this measure, I can probably just go with a tonic triad. And that is usually where you want to start. Well, before we go any further, let me play this melody for you so that you'll know what we're harmonizing. Here's the melody that we're harmonizing. Okay, so I know I want to start on a tonic, and I know I want to end on a tonic. So I'm going to go ahead and write that in too so I don't forget. A lot of the time, if you kind of have an idea of where the phrases are, it's good to actually write in the endings. So here, I know I'm probably going to write a dominant here, at least with this note. And I can look, does C sharp fit with my 5 chord? Well, I look here, and there is a C sharp in my 5 chord. So that lets me know that that C sharp will work fine with my 5 chord. But the D, think about a D in between a C sharp and an E. Not pretty. So probably just put my 5 here. Notice I've put my 5 chord in an inversion. Now the reason for this is that I'm writing this out as though it were going to be played by someone playing an instrument. And when you're playing an instrument, you don't like to jump around a lot with your hands. If I had written this in root position and put this A down here, and someone were to play it, they would have to do this. As you can hear, I missed a note. It's difficult and not very smooth, whereas writing it with the inversion, because this note is the same and these are close, it's much easier to play and it sounds nicer. So this is where your inversions will come in handy. Now I know here I want a predominant. So remember, my predominants were 4 and 2. And looking here, my 4 chord has a D in it. My 2 chord doesn't have a D in it, and it has an E. And intervals of a second are very dissonant, so we don't really want to use them to harmonize. If possible, try to use a triad that has that note in it, like the 4 chord. So I know that here, I'll put a 4 chord. Now again, I used an inversion because if I had put it in root position, there would have been a lot of jumping around. So I just rearranged the notes, but still G, B, D. And I just put that 4 chord here. Okay, so if we were to listen to the very ending, here's what we would hear. Well, that's all well and good, but now it's time to fill in the rest. Here, we said we want to have some sort of a phrase ending here. And remember, we said a 6th chord can function somewhat like a tonic. It can sort of fill in, but it's not as strong, obviously, as going to the tonic. And we wanted something that gave us a sense of stopping at the end of a phrase, but not a tonic, because we want to save the tonic, the big ending, for the end. So let's put a 6th chord here. And what's in my 6th chord? B, D, F sharp, right? It fits well with this note. And before our 6th chord, let's put a dominant, so we're acting just like we're going to the end of a phrase. So here, we have an E and an A, and those both fit in our dominant. So let's go ahead and use a dominant here. Okay, now we just need to fill in this measure and these two, and we'll be done. So here, we can really put anything, right? It doesn't have to be a predominant or a dominant. Think about those other kinds of filler chords we talked about, maybe a 2 chord. That would be okay, and that has a G in it. Really, our choices for chords with G would be a 2 chord or a 4 chord, and we don't want to use a 7 chord, remember, because we avoid that one because it's very dissonant. It's a diminished triad. So let's go with a 2 chord. And now that I've written that in, I think I'm going to switch this to be an inversion to avoid all that jumping around. Because see how much the hand would have to jump here, or the person playing whatever instrument? So let's just put the A up top. Now we have an inversion. It's a little bit smoother. Now we just need to do these 2 measures. Here we have an E and an A and another A. Looking at our triads, the 5 chord has E and A in it, so that would probably be a good choice. Even though we've had several 5 chords, remember some songs have nothing but 5 chords, so there's nothing wrong with throwing in another 5 chord here. Here we have an F sharp and a D. So we could use a 6 chord, or we could use a 1 chord. What do you think? How about both? In fact, why not just go ahead and put a chord on every note in this measure? Because remember, we said as the phrase comes to an end, we speed up the harmonic rhythm. So how about a 1 chord? And then let's look, what could we put with our E? Maybe a 2 chord or another 5 chord. I bet most of you at home are saying a 2 chord for variety. And then we could put our 6 chord here. We'll put it in an inversion so we don't have too much jumping around.